But before we start, maybe we can just open this for everybody. If there are any questions or any topics that people are interested in discussing.
Especially welcome would be a perspective of a fresh developer that hasn't been in Odyssey for too long, and just to hear what your experiences are, how we can improve things. That'd be great. Any other topics, as Chris said, please throw them in the group and we can discuss them.
And you can also type it in chat.
Kees, I just came. What was the subjects again? One subject is what new developers think, and what's the other one?
Well, we have some backup topics, but in general, we wanted to ask this community if people have any specific topics they would like to discuss or any questions to us. One of the topics that Kees brought up was about new developers and their experience with Odyssey tools. Another topic that we kind of had in the back pocket is how to align better software development and roadmaps across multiple components in Odyssey. And I was saying that I'm glad that Martin is here because he's leading up Hades package development. So, but again, that's it's an open call for everybody. If you have any questions, topics, please speak up, including you, Christian.
Unmute. Well, the subject would be interesting to figure out whether people have ideas or strong opinions is open source, right? How do you foster open source development that's both solid, somehow brings people together who actually have the time and resources, and it's still open and visible, and so all the good stuff that open source does can be followed. So for example, one thing is has to be possible to make derivative, right? And so that's something we are thinking about, and how would we think about that?
And we can use probably some existing examples like Atlas, right, as a tool that we've been developing as a community, or Hades as a package. I think the secret sauce is that it's the adoption of the tool, right? Who is the stakeholder, who is the customer of that tool? And I can see that, for example, in terms of Atlas or Hades as a package, that's multiple industries actually that are interested in adopting and utilizing this tool. Ranging from pharmaceutical industry and pharma customers to academic and healthcare institutions as well. And I think through that commercial or open science adoption is what's driving development of the tool, what's driving, I guess, contributions. I've seen several examples for multiple commercial organizations, including CRO, like IQVIA, were finding some of the features, and then they went back into an open source community, and everybody benefited from that contribution. And I think the more adoption that is being, the more tools being adopted, the more demand comes for quality of the tools. And I think I'm going to use again Atlas as an example. Matured quite a bit in the past few years working on that tool, and it includes testing. It includes good solid source code management and so on. And lately, I think we've been, as I mentioned before, quite interested in making sure that we have the same maturity level across multiple working groups, including with Hades working groups. So we've been obviously surfacing some of the challenges that exist and working collaboratively on trying to figure out how to solve it. I don't know, Martin, if you want to maybe say a few words about some of the challenges that between Atlas and Hades and how we're trying to align those things.
Sure. Yeah, maybe at a very high level, I think there is a drive from Hades to adopt new methods quickly and to be able to experiment with new methods. And also, I think a bit of an immaturity in the sense that not all Hades tools work without flaw on all possible data sets and data platforms. Whereas Atlas is taking, I think, a more approach towards stability and offering a certain service level that I think is a little bit of at odds currently, those two objectives. We should aim to, of course, come to some agreement in between.
And Christian, I don't know if you do have any opinion on that, but it's again, it's like we're trying to find a balance between a mature software engineering and stable tool, and the innovation and constantly changing code because of that. That the Hades development group is, is driving forward essentially a lot of new development. So we're trying to figure out. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Actually, I think there is a play for both of those models, and they can coexist quite well. But I don't know if you do have any opinion about how to align between such two models.
The mature model and the exploratory model, is that what you're saying?
Well, there's let me kind of maybe answer my own question a little bit as an idea, right? So okay. Atlas, I think I'm very proud to say that I think we became much more mature than we were as a team 3 or 4 years ago. And in some sense of continuous integration, it's very solid source code management, testing, releases, following versioning, semantic versioning, and so on. At the same time, we're integrated with other components from OHDSI, including Hades. So we're relying on PLE and PLP, for example, packages, right? And those are not static. I mean, they're actually quite dynamic, and they keep developing at a very different pace. So in my mind, I think there is a place where for two models to coexist, where you have some kind of a stable build in Hades, and Atlas probably would integrate with that, right? While the rest of the team continue to innovate and develop new versions of Hades packages that might not be stable, that might not be solid yet, but they're being tested, they're constantly developing, and then at some point a new mature version of Hades could be released, and then Atlas would catch up on that mature version, and so on. So it's basically aligning on a mature build and continuing to give Martin and the rest of the Hades team some freedom to do innovation, and us potentially some unstable code to be in place.
But I think that point where we could achieve that is Hydra, in the sense that Hydra currently, the skeletons can move at a slower pace, but also can reference older package versions, if you will. So that could be the stable point. I think that the only question is that, like, is it a stable point across all the skeletons, or is it a stable point per skeleton?
Right. So,
yeah, I mean, there's more than that, right? So there's a stability, there's integration, there's a UI, there is the technology integration. Well, maybe that's part of the integration, and then there is the how to call this, right? So if you take Hades and Atlas as an example, there's an overlap, but there's also a clear distinction of the purpose of these tools, and so you need to, for one thing, you need to actually declare that you want to keep them in sync. And you need to have a certain expectation from one, what the other one does for it. So like what's the
contract
handshake? What?
As a contract, right?
Exactly, as a contract. What's the handshake between the two? So that is public. And then generally, the question is, how do we make these things more visible and more public and more inviting and warm and fuzzy, which I understand isn't easy because you need to dig deep. So something that digs deep can't invite anybody from off the street to help digging if you're already 200 meters down in the earth. But these are the questions we need to think about and address. Because right now, you have like thanks, Memo. You have like a discontinuum. I don't know, such a word probably doesn't exist. Between the two, right? So essentially, Atlas was generated in order to consolidate a whole lot of other bits and pieces, Circe and Achilles and all sorts of things, because it became clear that if they live independently, they don't integrate, and it's going to be a nightmare for people to use both. But now we're kind of like moving apart again, right? So if I get Atlas, I don't know what kind of Hades functionality I get. And then what I do get is the ability to launch, but I don't get the ability to receive, because that happens in yet another tool. That happens in what we call the Shiny app, which of course is the worst name, where all the results live in a standardized fashion and can be examined and consumed. So essentially, we brought things together. Then we had something that was like the core tool that people used, and now we're starting using drifting apart a little bit again. And so that at least we are not doing much. If that's not true, then we're not doing much to counter that perception. So we need to discuss what it is that we really want and how integrated they should be. And if they're loosely integrated, we should make that clear. And if they're not loosely integrated, we should make this as a goal and actually execute on that.
Yeah. So
I think to this point, in Kees, maybe you could chime in from your perspective, but I think as a development community, we got to recognize we're a community of a bunch of individuals who are trying to contribute, and each of us come from a different perspective. And part of what happens that's natural in the community is some people are doing more of the iterative, exploratory development type stuff. Some people are more on the natural side of productionizing things and trying to follow robust software practices. And ultimately we're each contributing whatever our strengths and capabilities are, and trying to find ways we can actually like help out this kind of broader mission, whether we're here at the very start or we're just trying to like dive in the middle. But Kees, you've worked in a lot of different open source communities. Can you talk about like what does it take for a developer to get involved and kind of get from just started to kind of like leading some of these kind of strategic level decisions, and how does a community need to foster each other to work together towards this end?
Yeah, that's a good question. The top one thing I would say I've learned is that an open source community is only as strong as its constituents, and it's really all about the people that make it happen. I've seen open source community being destroyed by efforts to professionalize the development and streamline and manage and whatnot. So I think you have to be careful always, because we are an open source community in OHDSI. Of course, there are organizations, J&J, Odysseus, the Hive, etc., that we all work and that have a very clear role in it as well. So we should not discount that. But on the other hand, as a whole, we are an open source community, and so we have to really think about how we align this incentive, and that's a sort of constant dance. So don't make too big changes. But that being said, I think the nature that was described of Atlas, there's really a software product that also calls for software engineering, versus Hades, and especially like analytics, which is anyway a bit of a different style often between, let's say, software developers and architects versus data scientists. There's not an inherent problem here, and it's fine if that involves at different paces. Like, we shouldn't try and enforce one way of working throughout all of OHDSI. From my perspective, that wouldn't make sense. What we can do, and probably should think about, maybe also in the discussion a bit, is how do we get more people in, and how can we get more people to contribute and love this, and what are the main barriers where we can maybe fix small things that would help us also attract more people to the community. I'm interested also in your perspective, Martijn, because you're you've been in this for a long time, and well, Anthony is, I see, also on the list. So I don't know, any one of you that want to speak to, where do you think you can use the most help?
Well, I mean, we can certainly use a lot more help in Hades. I think a challenge that we've seen is that, and I think Christian already alluded to this, is that we are very deep down in the weeds. And so for somebody to come in, it's a very high barrier to entry just to understand what the tools are doing, and even more to how they're doing it. So there's way more work on our analytics packages than we currently have people doing it. And so that can be any type of activity, from writing unit tests to developing new packages or thinking of new methods and implementing them. So it's across the board, but I do find that even though there are people that want to contribute, that just the steps that they have to take, the diving as deep as they need to, that tends to be a big barrier to entry.
I like how you frame that though, Kees, and as you're describing that, Martin, I think I realized I myself have probably made a little bit of a disservice. We talk in Odyssey about the fact that we do open source development, and that's the objective, not the persona of the individuals achieving that objective. So like the goal is to have open source tools that the community can use. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an open source software developer to make meaningful contributions. And in case the way that you frame that we need software engineers, and we also need data scientists, and we also need power users of tools that can contribute to things such as testing and documentation. Somehow, as we think about this kind of professional development, the professional development for the Odyssey community in the open source development space, I think we have to find a way to talk about it as a narrative that goes beyond just software engineering. It certainly subsumes software engineering, but I've heard a bunch of people say, like, I can't contribute to Odyssey because, like, I'm not a professional software developer. And Martin, your point about this barrier to entry, I think there's a perception, and I think there's a reality that's true. It's super hard to get engaged. But I also think there's a perception that we probably could work on together, which is like, how do we make it seem like anybody can make a contribution, no matter what your level of technical depth is, because there's so much diversity in terms of the stuff that we need help on.
There was a question, by the way, from Alicia on open source tools. Do you want to ask that question, Alicia, or are you still here? I'm not sure it's in the list. No, looks like she's no longer in the list. Okay, then. Okay, multi-meeting, fine. But the open source development, I think getting into the community right now really requires, also from my experience, diving in, joining something like a studyathon or a team that knows it, and then just finding your own way. And that's okay. Like we don't have to go we shouldn't assume that there's thousands of developers that need to be onboarded on Odyssey. So, some barrier of entry is okay. But what we can think about are mechanisms also between ourselves. And those are honestly a bit unclear for me. I think there's more around Atlas. Maybe, Greg, you can speak on that. There are sometimes also architecture meetings, although I'm not sure if there's an active architecture working group. But like this idea, Martijn, that you just voiced with Hydra, and how that could be templates for Hades. I just hear you say it, so now I start looking at the Hydra repo. But is there some meeting that we need to have, or a recurring conversation to maybe make those things a bit easier?
Yeah, Kees, and I agree with you. Actually, Christian alluded to that, and I wanted to comment on that. I think to make an entry point easier for everybody, there needs to be some kind of a high-level architecture that is agreed, across all of the tools in the ecosystem. So it makes it very easy for people to understand what is what and how it fits in. It also makes it easier for development teams to understand the blueprint and understand where the tool is going, essentially, roadmaps that we need to create, right? Unless people see a bigger picture, it's going to be very difficult for them to understand what is Atlas, how it's connected to Hades, how is Hades developing, what's next on the roadmap, and that's definitely one of the gaps that we should all strive to resolve. Because I think, regardless whether regardless whether Hades is kind of marching ahead with the speed of light and developing these new tools, but still there is a place for a fairly lightweight but still mature process by which all those things happen. I think if we're aligned on the process by which we're developing those open source tools, it also will make it easier for development teams, but also easier for people to come in and understand what's expected from them to be followed, right? Because at the end of the day, when people come in, they don't understand the process, they don't understand the architecture, and that's one of the barriers, I think, that better documentation of that. And I agree, by the way, with you, Patrick, that to contribute, you actually made me think a little bit. You don't have to be a software development to contribute to Atlas. You can contribute with testing. You can contribute with requirements. As an example, if you're an experienced epidemiologist or experienced Atlas user, you can come back and help us to brainstorm the usability of the tool, to brainstorm how certain features can be implemented. It's actually a big contribution as well.
Yeah, I'm just go ahead, Martin. Sorry.
I just wanted to point out there is some information on Hades, on the process, on the roadmap on the Hades website, and we have a monthly Hades meeting that everybody is welcome to attend. Although I guess that's not common knowledge that that's the case.
Well, that's why I come here, to hear those great things. And I probably should be in the meeting. Is that one of the working groups?
Yes, so we have a meeting this Thursday at 6 o'clock your time, Kees, 6 p.m.
And I think we need to
just reflecting on, in terms of like development, we've had several conversations with Paul Beyondich about how the OpenMRS platform has kind of matured and how they've tried to facilitate developers within that community. And now there is an important distinction there, which is really the objective is explicitly software development, to develop a package. But everybody starts with not knowing the code base, not knowing how to make a contribution, and they need some baby step in. And one of the things that they do is mark issues in their repos of like things that are good for first-time users to dive into. A task that doesn't require knowing the entire stack in order to make a contribution. And if I think about development for our community, I do think that the issue that you raised, Martijn, about like barriers to entry is very real, and we have to come up with some strategy to foster engagement that starts with marketing, that like you don't need to be a professional software developer to actually be able to meaningfully make contributions right away, but also like it doesn't require that you learn everything in order to make a small contribution. We have to have some sort of easier pathway to develop the community. There are some packages that we have, like actually I just posted an issue just like I think it was over the weekend or something. I posted an issue on, I forget what it was. It was cohort diagnostics, and like there's just an ggplot like bug in one of Gautham's graphs, and it's like that's a perfect thing for somebody who could make a meaningful contribution. That like all you really need to know is R and ggplot. You don't need to know Odyssey. You don't need to know healthcare. It's just like the graph is trellised and put plot A. It went, instead of ABCD, it was ADCB. So like the sort order needs to be changed. That's a little teeny contribution, but it's important and it's useful, and somebody could make that. I don't know how we foster and encourage greater participation, and we reduce the barrier. But it seems like for development, we do need to be recognizing the importance and value of bringing more people on. They maybe have strong skills, they're just new to Odyssey, and we've got to figure out how to maybe recognize and be able to pull them along to allow them to make the contributions they could.
And I think a lot of people simply don't realize that they can contribute, Patrick, because I think contribution or desire to contribute comes from the usage of the tool. In many cases, people begin to use those tools and they realize that the tool is lacking certain features or is lacking certain usability, and they keep posting essentially change requests back to a GitHub repo instead of thinking, hey, it's fairly easy change, as you said. I can just, I can fix it and I can post a change back into a community. I think if we actually advertise this way of working, you can consume, but you can also contribute changes back into a community. That would be a big deal. Kees, I think Patrick also asked you, you guys, contribute to multiple open source tools in various communities. Do you see a lot of differences between those communities in terms of processes and the approaches that they're taking?
Yeah, very much. I mean, those communities are all relatively small because they are, of course, specialized open source tools. But I think in reality, most of them are driven forward by a small core group of developers. And that is for most, even a project as big as the Linux kernel, if you get down to it, there's a few people there in the center that are doing, and then you have this whole modular structure. And that is in almost all open source software, successful projects anyway, the case, because it's hard to, let's say, design and build software by committee. And in the end, you have to become a team. So, and attracting contributions from, let's say, strangers or people that are just occasionally bumping into Odyssey is very hard, and maybe not the goal that we should have, but we can have that goal for documentation. And there's certainly people doing that. I've contributed to documentation of many open source projects, even ones that I only interacted with once. And well, that's also a lifestyle, let's say. Indeed, many people do not recognize this, but it's growing, that awareness that can be done. And certainly in data science is becoming more and more common. And this is why we should always make sure that we are using the standard way to do this, just using GitHub issues. I think that's also how we already have it in Odyssey. But yeah, it's nice if it happens. Counting on it is hard. I think what you can try to do is attract new developers that are in the community, like the people in the school. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. Where can we help you? Where can you give you a push or get you on board? Those are the things that we can do. And yeah, it is difficult to get into Odyssey, and those are very distinct communities, because getting started on Hades is very different versus contributing to the OMOP CDM versus contributing to Atlas or any of the other open source tools.
And there are quite a few people actually, Nicole. I was wondering if anybody has any comments or.
And if not, I'm just going to pick on Justin. Hi, do you want to say something, or what brought you to this meeting? Would you like to discuss?
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. It took me just a few minutes to get the unmute button to work. No, I'm just here to learn a little bit more sort of about some of the development. We're pretty new at our organization to Odyssey. I think we've now got the CDM pretty in hand, but sort of the next steps is just me learning a little bit more about some of the tools and some of the software that's out there in association with it, and seeing what opportunities and or sort of challenges and tools that are out for us available. So this just sounded interesting to sort of sit and lurk as a fly on the wall here.
Is there any particular part of the Odyssey ecosystem that you've already tested, worked with, interacted with?
We've used DQD pretty extensively so far. That's been our main tool. I do know that we are looking to implement Atlas probably later on in the next few months, as well as a tool to start being able to leverage some of the data for more than just some of the initial COVID studies that we've been tackling.
Cool, that's an interesting route to take, to start with DQD.
So you skipped the rabbits, the Usagi and the rabbit in a hat? Just curious.
We did use Usagi as sort of a tool to help out with our mappings, but it's been pretty much a back-end tool just to help with vocabularies for the most part for us.
Cool. How about you, Niels?
Yeah, hi. So Niels from ITTM. So we joined the Eden training, one of the first SMEs, and we also work with the OMOP Common Data Model in other projects outside of Eden. And so from my side, I'm more on the installation system administration side, and I'm more on this, so these 2 points, more like trying to get new features in or having a stable version. I'm more on the stable version because I have to install this for clients. And actually, I've been looking into these Docker images, so these methods library and BroadC tools, and we have started working on them a little bit more, and we might get back to you to bring that back to the community, because so what we've done, for example, is taking from Greg these like fixed versions of our packages to make sure that that we always have the same version of the R packages installed at different sites, and to make sure that they are all working together. And we're definitely looking into this so that we can make sure that we set up something that works out of the box. And so testing is definitely a thing where we'd like to see more. We have obviously limited resources in developing more, but we like what we have done is probably something that we can feed back to the community. And so that's kind of my side. So. And I'll definitely get back to you when we have this in a more stable version, these Docker images. And I'd also be happy to learn if there's someone else working on this so that we can join forces maybe.
Yeah, good point. You made me realize that most of the Odyssey documentation is actually decentralized, apart from the Book of Odyssey, which of course ties it all together. But for BroadC and how to use Odyssey with Docker and Kubernetes, I guess that you would have to go to the BroadC repo. I have a colleague that was also working on BroadC, so I can put you in touch with him, Niels.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
And Niels, not to put you on the spot, but what was your biggest challenge in adopting or using those tools so far?
Yeah, really getting the right versions to each other, and that's how we reached your repository essentially. Mm-hmm. Because I think the BroadC that are in the repository as is, it really depends on when you build the Docker images of which versions you pick up. And right. I think this is really something that makes it difficult because it's always a moving target. Sorry, there's some noise in the background. So I think that was the hard part, and to like really get all these things together. So we usually now deploy in Atlas and in RStudio, and then usually we run an ETL in a virtual machine that runs aside of it. Or so we have like one compact installation, one Linux VM. You install Docker, which runs Tomcat for Atlas, and RStudio for users to log in and interrogate the database.
Yeah, and that's a very good example of you deploying essentially a whole ecosystem together, and that's very important for us to realize that while we have Hades development group and Atlas development group and many other groups, but we need to really figure out this baseline deployment of the whole ecosystem into like Eden as a prime example where it's happening today. Thank you, Niels. Kees, do you want to pick a next victim?
Victims, yes. Who we haven't heard from. We haven't heard from Coleman Hilton. Oh, yeah, there you are.
I will show up on camera. Good morning. I guess it's still morning for everybody. I'm from Shriners Hospitals for Children. I am sort of a mixed story of being new to diving into this. We have a grant project that funded our OMOP repository here at Shriners Hospitals for the last several years. And I worked on it when the grant was new and have been removed for several years, but the project now being centralized as of 15 days from now, it becomes kind of back onto my plate for something to work on. And so this is my first call rejoining the community and a topic of interest for me to kind of engage with. We've looked at Atlas for our organization to be able to better engage with the repository, and our cybersecurity team actually rejected it. I don't have any notes on that, but when I was involved years ago when we were first setting up the repository, I really liked Atlas as a tool. So it's interesting to get more information on the development around it and continue to build my understanding and kind of the initial days as I prepare to get elbows deep into our project again.
Sounds good. And for your deployment, I heard CHOP, right? You said CHOP?
No, Shriners Hospitals for Children.
Okay. And in your specific case, what was your biggest obstacle? Something that prevented you from using? What were the obstacles?
I would say that our biggest obstacle generally for making use of our repository is a lack of technical knowledge in our organization. That we don't have a large technical workforce. We are mostly clinicians, and so it makes it so that the repository is hard to approach, even with great richness within it and the ability to make the data available and accessible. I think that exploring the tools that are being developed are going to be of key importance to us to make sure that we're able to surface some of that data and make it available for our end users.
Thank you.
James, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, sure. So I work with Patrick and Martijn, who are on the call. I guess I sit somewhere at the moment between the stable ecosystem that is Hades and then our internal software applications of Hades, which is maybe not so stable. And that also involves a lot of interfacing with Atlas and I guess trying to develop new Hades packages and new software that kind of fits into the mold of more stable applications of things that already exist. So to give you kind of a small example, like working with kind of PLE packages that are applied well in studies, but we're trying to apply them in a kind of more large scale way. And it's not so much that the packages themselves aren't stable, it's just that they're not necessarily written with the mode of operation that I may be using them for. So it's kind of, that is one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is trying to get that code back down into the open source community rather than just in our own internal environments. Because, you know, when it sits in our own internal environment, it solves a problem that we have that's maybe not going to be solvable with that particular infrastructure for everyone. So that's kind of one of the challenges I'm facing in the not too distant future. And I think that's like a sort of a general problem in open source is we solve a problem for our own needs, and then when you make it open source, you kind of have to think about what other users might experience when they interact with it, and often that kind of is a large barrier from turning something internal into something that a community can drive. But on the other end of it, you are kind of you do develop more kind of stable software as a product of trying to make it open source, I think. So you do definitely benefit from that process. So,
thank you, James.
Yeah, and it looks like we're already on the hour. So I guess we'll close our session here. Thanks everyone for contributing to discussion. It's clear that there are things that we can improve, and at the same time we have a very vibrant open source community, really bazaar style, if you know the metaphor. And I think that's working great. So I'll try to join one of the next HDS meetings, Martijn. I can't make it Thursday, and good luck everyone in making your ways in this community. Let's get some nice Docker containers up, Niels, with Odyssey. I think that would benefit everyone greatly.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Perfect. Thanks to you. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.